Hello, everybody, and welcome. Good evening. Welcome to our second lecture of our Spring 2014 Library Lecture Series. The Library Lecture Series brings intellectual engagement and dialogue, celebrating the many diverse points of view within our community. The series features discussions that may be relevant to current curriculum and academic pursuits, as well as current issues and events locally, regionally, and nationally. I am very excited to introduce our two lecturers today, students Jacqueline Sutherland and Blythe Riggan. Today's lecture, titled Beyond the Bubble, Wake Forest Students in the Middle East and Africa, highlights these two students' unique experiences representing Wake Forest in the world. We are thrilled to hear their stories and give them the opportunity to impart advice and insight to those here today. Jacqueline Sutherland is currently a senior at Wake. Originally from Chicago, Illinois, she is pursuing a major in politics and international affairs and a minor in Middle East and South Asian studies. Over the course of 4 years, I have watched Jacqueline grow into a phenomenal student leader on this campus. She has the privilege of serving as president of student government and still manages to be part of other groups on top of this. She serves as a tour guide, reports and anchors for Wake TV News, sings in the concert choir, and is a member of Alpha Delta Pi sorority. Thank you for being here with us today, Jacqueline. Next, Blythe Riggan. Blythe is a sophomore hailing from Lexington, North Carolina. She is studying politics and international affairs here. As a young Wake Forest student, Blythe has taken advantage of many opportunities early on and has shown herself to be an active student leader on campus. She is both a member of Alpha Delta Pi sorority and the Wake Forest rowing team, and currently serves as president of the Nyanya Project, Students for the World. Blythe is also a participant in the Institute for Public Engagement. We are so thrilled to have you here as well. So Blythe, you're up.
Well, as Lauren said, my name is Blythe Riggan, and I'll be sharing my experience abroad in Kenya and Rwanda this past summer. And so I entitled my presentation Across the Table because I realized that a lot of my education abroad happened over the dinner table. Growing up, Wake Forest University had always been my ideal school, but my biggest fear was I'd be too familiar. With two parents and two uncles being Wake alumni, and the school being only 40 minutes from home, Wake Forest did not feel like the place where I would learn to become independent and grow on my own. I did not feel like I'd be expanding my horizons if I attended the university where I went to soccer camp, choral competitions, and both the football and basketball games. My parents met at Wake Forest Med School. My father proposed to my mom on the steps of Wake Chapel. I owned a pair of Wake Forest baby shoes, and I was once a Wake Forest cheerleader for Halloween. My entire life had been connected to Wake Forest in some way. But the fact that I'm here giving a lecture on my time outside of the Wake Forest bubble is firm proof that I've been fortunate enough to have had the growing experience of a lifetime. My time outside the Wake Forest bubble started with a seemingly normal event, an appointment with Wake Forest journalism professor Mary Martin Nia Poll during office hours. We were connected to each other by a mutual friend, and soon I found myself in Nia Poll's office. After learning about her nonprofit, the Nyanya Project, I expressed interest because of my wonderful experience in Botswana, Africa in 2011, and my desire to enter in the nonprofit sector. Then Nia Poll asked the fateful question, how would you like to come to Africa with me? Nyanya is Swahili for grandmother. The Nyanya Project empowers African grandmothers who are raising AIDS orphan grandchildren through working cooperatives and business skills training. After being trained to care for HIV-infected family members and reinvest income, the grandmothers become role models for other women in their communities. To date, a total of 296 grandmothers caring for approximately 1,500 orphans and family members have been trained and assisted. Research shows no government assistance for AIDS grandmothers caring for AIDS orphan grandchildren in Kenya, Rwanda, and Tanzania, leading Nia Poll to call these grandmothers the forgotten faces of the AIDS crisis. Nia Poll is both the ultimate storyteller and has an uncanny knowledge of a wide range of topics. Over dinner, she explained the difference in Kenya and Rwandan governments. She taught me the basics of the Rwandan genocide using our hotel room keys. She shared stories of those who survived the genocide and counseled me on how I can continue to learn about Africa while dealing with the inevitable feelings of guilt and helplessness. We also discussed breast cancer. Both her and my own grandmother are breast cancer survivors, the importance of being big in terms of moral character, and how pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. I've joked with her several times that our trip was more than a crash course on nonprofits, but a crash course on life. The ultimate dinner table experience happened just across the street from our hotel. Nia Poll is the master of making connections, and so she had met a recent medical school graduate, Sandrine Crane, in Winston-Salem, where Sandrine is a resident at Wake Forest Baptist Health. Sandrine, who grew up in Kigali, Rwanda, asked Nia Poll if we could deliver a package to Sandrine's parents once we arrived. Nia Poll agreed, and we set up a meeting with the couple at a prominent hotel within walking distance of our own. When Nia Poll asked Sandrine's father over the phone if he knew where Hotel des Mille was, he simply responded, yes. For those who are familiar with the film Hotel Rwanda, Hotel des Mille was Hotel Rwanda featured. Although it's kept its original name, the hotel has been remodeled in attempts to make it less frightening. In 1994, more than 1,200 people were sheltered from the killings outside. Everyone hiding in the hotel survived. Nia Poll and I sat with the couple and discussed Sandrine, their family, and our thoughts on our trip to Rwanda. After sharing our plans for the day, which include visiting reconciliation villages where Hutus and Tutsis now live side by side, and the Nyanya Church, where over 2,000 Tutsis hiding in the church were killed, Sandrine's mother admitted that she grew up in the Nyanya region. She told us, "My parents died in the Nyanya Church." Chilled, we allowed the silence to take the place of insignificant words. Nia Poll delicately continued, "I am so sorry. Where were you in 1994? This was the year of the Rwandan genocide." After which Sandrine's father spoke up, "We were here in 1994. We lowered our heads, assuming he meant he was in Rwanda during the events. "So you were in Rwanda?" Nia Poll asked. "Yes, but we were here," he explained, pointing his finger at our general location. "Kigali?" Nia Poll asked. He continued, "Yes, Kigali, but we were here." He pointed to the very hotel we were sitting at. We were hiding in Hotel des Mille for 3 weeks. To sit at a table at des Mille with a couple who hid there during the Rwandan genocide is an experience that cannot be found in museums or textbooks. It is the human stories of suffering and survival that seem to tear at our heart the most. One of the most compelling things I learned in Africa during my time in Africa was the power of education on multiple levels. On a basic surface level, I learned how fundamental education is to one's society. All but few of our Nyanya Project grandmothers are illiterate and have received little or no education. Our Nyanya Project grandmothers are doing everything in their power to make sure that their granddaughters and grandsons receive the education they never had. As one grandmother in Kibera, Kenya said, "Since I did not go to school, I was not respected in society. By taking my grandchildren to school, they will lift my name." However, on a more complex level, I learned about the importance of a different type of education, the need for more informed Western perspectives. Africans do not need saving. As much as I love the compassion shown towards our fellow brothers and sisters, it's time to learn about the toxicity of charity work. What I love about the Nyanya Project is its focus on sustainability. The Nyanya Project has a preschool in Kibera, Kenya, one of the largest slums in Africa. What's overwhelming to me is the fact that there are hundreds of nonprofits within the concentrated region of Kibera. How is it that there are so many nonprofits if there is still such extreme poverty? It all goes back to, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Nonprofits are helping no one when they give handouts. It's an irresponsible practice because it creates dependency on a temporary organization, as many nonprofits in Africa do not last longer than 5 years. This is where I have found my passion. The Nyanya Project seeks to set up bank accounts, teaches grandmothers business skills, and starts them off with the resources they need. The rest is up to the grandmothers. I saw results from this summer as grandmothers spoke of empowerment, a feeling of importance and autonomy, and the revolutionary question that was asked by one grandmother when we were sitting in a circle. She said, "We have about $300 in our group bank account. What do we do with it?" The grandmothers vote on what the money should be spent on. Sometimes it has been used to pay hospital bills. Other times it's been spent on funeral expenses. The important part is the Nyanya Project grandmothers hold the power to educate. the power to live independently, the power to support their own family, and the power to determine their own futures. Another point I learned while in Kenya and Rwanda is that love defies reason. When in Ndati, Kenya, Professor Nia Poll shared the following story with me. In spring of 2007, Professor Nia Poll traveled to Ndati, Kenya, where she met the woman in the photo, Mary Wanjiku. Nia Poll was told that Wanjiku, age 71, had just returned to Ndati, literally the day before her meeting. Wanjiku had gone to rescue her 2 grandsons, also in the photo, from the city of Kisumu, almost 300 miles west. A neighbor had gotten the call. Wanjiku's son had died of AIDS. His wife had died of AIDS a year earlier. Wanjiku simply answered the call. She started walking to get her grandsons, Clinton, age 5, and Philemon, age 8. She began walking down the mountain starting her 300-mile journey. She had no money, so she would walk the whole 300 miles if she had to. When neighbors saw her, they collected enough money for her bus fare. The bus took 12 hours. When Mary arrived past midnight, she found her grandsons, shivering and naked, beside an outdoor fire. No one had taken them in. "What did you do?" Nia Poll asked. Wanjiku simply responded, "I gathered them up and brought them home. Now it's okay. They sleep on the mattress, and I sleep on the ground." 7 years later, Mary and her grandsons herd a dozen sheep provided by Nia Poll's Nyanya Project. One of the most difficult things for me to learn while in Rwanda was reconciliation. Reconciliation is the act of reestablishing a close relationship. Before my time in Rwanda, I likened it to the act of forgiveness. We forgive and we forget. We all make mistakes. We hope for forgiveness. But how do we strive for reconciliation? How can we reconcile after so much devastation like the Rwandan genocide? There are several reconciliation villages in Rwanda, funded by a Christian nonprofit. Residents are permitted to live there under the condition that survivors and perpetrators of the genocide agree to coexist peacefully. The founding members of the community vote on who can live there, with a preference for the most vulnerable families in terms of poverty and or illness. The villagers farm together and care for one another as true neighbors, despite their backgrounds. A widowed Tutsi mother, whose family was killed during the genocide, explained the dynamics of village life. Whenever she goes to purchase groceries, she left her young children with her neighbor, a Hutu man, who confirmed that he was a perpetrator of the genocide. She trusted her children with him and purchased groceries for him as a sign of appreciation. Together, they reached a point beyond forgiveness. Trust and reconciliation were the only ways to move forward. I honestly believe that life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. While adventures can occur within the United States or even on a Wake Forest campus, I cannot tell you how powerful an adventure abroad can be. I learned more about myself during my 2 weeks in Africa than I'd ever planned to. You don't have to spend an entire summer or an entire semester abroad. Find your passion, find your niche. Wish, hope, dream, and then chase after it. Don't hesitate to use your resources on campus. My journey outside the Wake Forest bubble started simply with office hours. If there's one thing I would take away from this trip, it's the power of conversation. If you take the time to start the conversation and you're willing to listen, you'll have a world of possibilities and, just maybe, the chance to learn powerful life lessons and expand your education across the dinner table. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jacqueline Sutherland, and just first want to welcome you all here and thank you all for being here tonight. And also thank Lauren for giving me this opportunity to talk about my experience beyond the bubble, studying abroad in Istanbul, Turkey. So to begin with, I want to ask the question that everyone asked me before I studied abroad: why Turkey? It's definitely not a traditional location, especially on this campus. And kind of to answer that, I'd have to go back to my freshman year. And I took an introduction to Islam class, which actually was not intended. It was something that was sort of a registration fluke that I couldn't get into the class I wanted to for that divisional. And so I ended up in this class, which very quickly turned into be a very big blessing in disguise. And it was a class that I was interested in taking. It wasn't my first choice, as I said, but it was in 2010, and so it was about almost 10 years after the 9/11 10-year anniversary. And thinking back on that, I was remembering all of these different images that were going up in the media right after 9/11 of Muslims. And I had a very homogenous neighborhood growing up, very homogenous high school. And so my only association with the Islamic faith was a lot of these sound bites and headlines that I'd been seeing in regards to women and burqas and hijabs being portrayed as, kind of subjugated, and then seeing images of suicide bombers. And those were really the only associations I had with Islam. And so I really yearned kind of to learn about the faith and to fill that sort of substance gap with some true knowledge and some truth about it. And so right away, there were all these really interesting students in the class, international students from Pakistan and Afghanistan. My professor, Dr. Nellie Van Doorn Harder, if anyone has taken her, is taught all over the world in Indonesia and in Egypt, and it was just a really, really fascinating classroom experience. And so that kind of ignited my passion originally. And after that, started taking more classes in Islam, declared my minor, and then when it came time to selecting a study abroad location, I decided I had to go to the Middle East. I felt like I really wouldn't have any credibility studying this stuff unless I did that. And so went to the study abroad office and found out that there was not really a program in place for what I wanted to do. We have programs in Jordan and Morocco and in Egypt, but they're all pretty much linguistically based with Arabic. And I had not taken Arabic, and I was really more interested in kind of studying the role of religion, of Islam in society, and how that affected politics and sort of like the social life there. And so I landed on Turkey, which is a very, very interesting place. It is literally smack dab in between Europe and Asia, 99.9% Muslim, but a secular government. And so I said this to my study abroad advisor, and he's like, well, we don't really have a program there. So I went out looking and found that there was this program sponsored by Duke University that was partnered with a Turkish university where I'd be a direct exchange student at a place called Boğaziçi University, which is the highest ranked university in Turkey. So now this sounds pretty interesting, and especially the part about being an exchange student in the classroom with all these Turkish students and other international students who I quickly found out were actually not majorly American, but were from Iraq and Iran and Syria and Northern Africa. These were their international exchange students. And so I thought this sounded like a really great opportunity, went through the whole process of getting the program approved, and eventually got it approved for credit and decided I was going to go to Istanbul. And then in addition to it fitting in with my major and with my minor, also it's just a historical hotbed there. It's the Fertile Crescent, it's Constantinople, the Silk Road is in Turkey, and so all of that was really fascinating to me. And then also, I put minority status. This is sort of a strange reason to go to a place that is a little bit difficult to explain, but I realized, especially in conversations with a lot of really close Muslim friends at Wake Forest, that I had never been in a position where I'd been a minority before, other than being female. I'm a white Christian woman, and I just had never had that experience. And I thought, studying all of this, that was something I really, really needed to figure out what it felt like. And I knew in Turkey that I would be a minority, and I would be able to feel that uncomfortability of what that is like and what it's like to potentially be misrepresented in a situation. And these also, all the pictures that I've included are all personal pictures that I took there. And so these are some of the mosques. To the upper left is just some Turkish women having tea. To the upper right is Hagia Sophia Mosque in Istanbul, which is really famous. To the bottom left is in Iznik, Turkey. It's another famous mosque, the Grand Suleyman Mosque. And then to this side is the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, which is also really famous. So I get to Turkey, and when anyone goes abroad, people are always asking, okay, did you get culture shock? Even if it's in Western Europe, just because naturally, if you're going to a brand new place, you're going to have it. And so yes, I definitely had it, and I'm going to kind of talk about the layers of culture shock that I experienced, because there are many, many different layers, and these were just the beginning, just the surface layers. So immediately I got there, and it was really the only way I can describe it is to say it was a sensory overload. Just all these vibrant, loud sights and sounds and smells. First, to begin with, the call to prayer. Heard that 5 times a day, every day, which I knew I was expecting that because, again, it's a Muslim-majority country. But it was interesting because where I was in my neighborhood, there were about 5 or 6 different mosques in a 2-block radius. And the call to prayers are not uniform there. And so every single mosque hires their own person to sing the call to prayer. And so when it does go off, and they all go off at the same time, the same 5 times every day, you're just bombarded with all of these different songs, all these different singers singing about it. And so that was very interesting and very different right away. That was a good wake-up call, literally, my first morning there at about 4:30 in the morning. And then after just sort of some of the surface layers, started discovering some of the internal dangers, really just the reality of being in a place so incredibly different. And while I was on the program, again, with Duke University, and it was about 18 of us, so we did have American students there, but because it was exchange, I lived in a Turkish dorm with 3 other Turkish women, and then in almost all my classes, Apawazichi, I was the only American in the room. Definitely the only woman who had blonde hair and was not covered with a headscarf. So these were very just obvious things that I experienced in my everyday life. But about my first week there, it was the anniversary of 9/11, and it was the first time I went downtown. And when you go downtown Istanbul, people are usually referring to Sultanahmet, which is the tourist area with the Blue Mosque and Hagia Sophia and the Grand Bazaar, all those tourist attractions that you hear about. And there's actually a suicide bombing that day about 2 blocks away from where I was. And it was small. There were only 3 people killed, but, I mean, there were 3 people killed, and it was just sort of that sudden reality check of being in a place where this is not something that is a fluke. It wasn't even reported on in the news because it has become something, sadly, that is so common. And so that was something kind of right away that I was very much alerted to. And then a couple weeks later, I was actually on a bus in downtown Sultanahmet, and there was a suicide bomber on my bus. And the bomb actually, it was a faulty bomb, and so it didn't fully go off, but it meant to detonate, and then they found out that it was thankfully a faulty bomb. But that was just sort of another experience of just being in a place so incredibly different where you really just do have to be on your guard all the time, always kind of watching and being aware of what's going on around you. Definitely different than many other experiences. And then I wrote down Kurdish protests. So the Kurds are a minority group in Turkey that are very oppressed, very subjugated against. It's actually illegal for them to speak Kurdish. There's just been sort of like a long line of oppression within the country. And there was one time where I was going to take my midterm at a class, and I was from where I lived in my Turkish dorm, I was about a mile away from the university. And so my friends and I were walking through the neighborhood to get to the building to take our midterms, and there's this huge Kurdish protest out on the gates in front of the school. And at the time, there are many Kurds that had been imprisoned by the Turkish government, and there's a hunger strike going on by the Kurds for basically saying, we need our rights, you can't do this to us. And so there are many university students and then just other people that were protesting against this in favor of the rights for the Kurds. And so my friends and I actually had to walk through this protest that was in front of our university gates to actually get to the campus. And when we got to the building, we were supposed to take our midterm. All of the doors had been locked and chained to make sure that the protesters weren't going inside the buildings. So we ended up crawling through a window to get inside the building to take this midterm. Took the midterm, walked back to our dorm, and there are many students in the lobby, many international students in the dorm that were all cluttered together, and they're saying, like, hey, are you okay? Did you know that there's a protest going on? And we said, yes, we did know. We just ended up walking through it a couple hours ago. And it turned out that the protest had actually been tear-gassed and water-bombed about 10-20 minutes after we had walked through. And if anyone followed the Gezi Park protest in the spring, it was basically that on a very large scale in terms of police brutality and different protests being tear-gassed and water-bombed. And so it was just interesting to have that as sort of a foreshadowing of what the political climate ended up doing. And then again, these are some more pictures. Another mosque. This sign is actually, it's one of the first things I saw when I got to Turkey. That is a sign from Istanbul Ataturk Airport, and it translates to, please use the masjid facilities for ablution instead of the sink. And ablution is the act of cleansing oneself with water before Muslims pray. And so that was just sort of an interesting initial culture shock right after I got off the plane. Okay, so I'll talk more just sort of about the reality of this minority status that I'm talking about. And so in terms of the layers, sort of the obvious ones were being American, being female, and being Christian. And I kept a blog while I was there that I know Lauren followed, and this is actually an excerpt from my blog that I wrote about. I was in Turkey right during both Benghazi and then also right after the Innocence of Muslims video was released. And so thinking back to that, even though Benghazi occurred in Libya, there are so many different repercussions of this all throughout the Muslim world. And so in the days after this and the weeks after this, we were seeing a lot of anti-American demonstrations and anti-American protests. And so I had two roommates that were both Turkish, and they moved in right after Benghazi happened. And so this excerpt I have from my blog, and Deniz was my Turkish roommate. So when I told Deniz's mother that I was from the U.S., the switch illuminating her congenial smile suddenly flickered off. In its place were visible traces of discomfort, distrust, and fear. I soon learned that neither she nor her family had ever met an American. Their only experience with Americans involved what they read, heard, and observed through newspapers, news shows, and popular culture. In other words, they lacked an experience to humanize the people they appeared to identify against. It's amazing how quickly the absence of humanization can lead to the presence of demonization. And it was very interesting just to have this perspective, because obviously, this is not just applicable to my experience as a minority in Turkey. This is applicable to any minority group anywhere. And it really was interesting thinking first, I know Americans tend to be a little bit ethnocentric in the fact thinking that everyone has met an American, the whole world speaks English, and so being in a place where my Turkish roommates spoke very, very little English, and then had never met an American before. And so that was something after that initial encounter, this is about a week after I moved in, was just this reminder that I felt all of a sudden that I had this responsibility in Turkey with all these different people that I was meeting, some of which were very anti-American, many of which were not, and were very open to getting to know me, to getting to know other people there, but just felt this responsibility to try to humanize these experiences that they had against me and Americans, and then also getting the opportunity for them to humanize all these stereotypes that I had against the Muslim world and against Turks. So the second layer was being female, and this is something I was really interested to study because in any introduction to Islam class, you'll learn about gender divides, gender binaries, barriers, and there's very much this popular conception that women are oppressed in the Muslim world. And I'd been in class on Wake Forest campus, and I knew both sides of the debate, in terms of when women veil themselves, does this mean they're oppressed, or does this mean that they're actually, freeing themselves from sort of the patriarchal demands of society and showing that they're very pious to God? And when I got there and was suddenly this one of the few people that was not veiled, that was clearly an American, again with blonde hair, that very much distinguished me. I had many people throughout my semester asking to take their pictures with me because they had never seen blonde hair before and they didn't know what it was. But, when you are there in that reality, it's sort of like all those debates, knowing both sides of the argument kind of almost went out the window. Because, again, it was just that human-to-human interaction and those automatic responses. And so that was another opportunity that I tried, at least, to humanize those experiences, because there were a lot of Turkish men that had the stereotype that females from America are very easy and, that were very much kind of Hollywoodized. And so, again, that was sort of a challenge that I faced, but also an opportunity to open the door to conversation. And this woman that I have my picture with became one of my closest friends in Turkey. And her name is Evin, and she's actually Kurdish. And so, as I mentioned, the Kurds are a very oppressed minority group. And she was studying at Boğaziçi. She was a senior when I was there, so she only had one semester after I left, so she's now graduated. And she is from this pretty rural village in Turkey called Batman. And it is the village in Turkey with the highest number of honor killings out of anywhere in the Middle East. And for those of you who don't know, an honor killing is a cultural practice where if a woman is seen to sort of violate a social norm or to take away from the honor of her family, and this can include even being raped by a man, and even if it is not her fault, it can still be seen as tarnishing the reputation and honor of her family. Her family will actually kill her to restore that honor and to restore that reputation. And so the fact that she was from this village with the highest number of honor killings out of anywhere in the Middle East that's a lot to take in. And we got to know each other very, very well. We would have a weekly tea session where we would get together and have tea and talk about all kinds of things. And it was very interesting because initially it was really awkward because we came from such different pasts. And I knew that she was a very devout Muslim. Her father was an imam, which is sort of like an Islamic priest. And it was just, it was clear that we almost had nothing in common. But then we started talking, and we started talking some more, and we found out how incredibly similar we were, just in terms of our aspirations, what we wanted, sort of the way that our brains worked. And so eventually we got to a place after a couple weeks. It was after the third cup of tea, which is actually funny, if anyone's heard that tradition where in both Eastern and then also Middle Eastern cultures, it's often the third cup of tea, the third time you meet, that sort of that barrier is broken. And it really is true, at least it was true in this instance. And so it was after that third cup of tea where I straight up kind of asked her, and I know this was sort of a bold move, but I was like, Evin, I love getting tea with you. I love having these conversations. And I was like, but I'm so curious. I want to know more about you, but I'm really afraid to ask because I don't want to appear like I'm offending you or that I'm ignorant. So I was like, can we both just kind of put everything on the table, throw out all hesitation, and just basically ask each other, just open the room for conversation, for questions about anything, with the understanding that we're both genuinely curious and that we're not going to offend each other. And so she agreed to that, and we just started asking each other anything. What does it mean to you to wear the headscarf, to wear the hijab? And she asked me a lot about Christianity, a lot about the West and what that was like. And she was actually following my blog, which was interesting. And she was like, Jacqueline, she's like, if I went to the U.S., because she had never traveled outside of Turkey, she was like, if I went to the U.S., do you think I would experience the same kind of minority experience that you're experiencing here in Turkey? And that's a difficult question to answer. And so we had many, many different conversations about that. But that relationship, that friendship was definitely humanizing so many different stereotypes and so many different encounters. Okay, so the third layer, external safety threats. And so I mentioned that I was there right after Benghazi, right after the Innocence of Muslims video, but I was also there in the fall of 2012, right when the violence with Syria was really beginning to heat up. And there's a stretch of about 3.5 weeks to the end of October, beginning in November, where there was tremendous violence at the Turkish-Syrian border. Turkey's smack dab in a very volatile region. It's Turkey, and then it's surrounded by Iran, Iraq, Syria, series of other countries, but it's in a pretty hotbed of a region. And so when the violence started, the civil war started in Syria, there's all this violence spilling past the borders in terms of bombs going off, shells being fired, killing Turks on the Turkish side. And so really overnight, just the climate in Turkey really, really changed. It's all anyone was talking to. Everyone, I use this language, on the brink of war, because that's what the national conversation was like in Turkey. They were all saying, we're on the brink of war. And I had all these Turkish friends actually asking me, like, what is the U.S. going to do? Because Turkey and U.S. are NATO partners. And so if Turkey intervened, the U.S. would intervene, and vice versa. So they're like, are they going to intervene? Is this going to be another Iraq war? And, obviously I didn't know. But it was very scary. We were talking about evacuation plans. Should this happen? Parents were freaking out, and it was just, a very unsettling time. And I think in this, I have a picture. Well, first, the top picture is actually the suicide bombing on the bus, not the one that I was on, but the one on 9/11. And then the bottom picture is just an example of the police presence that emerged when all this violence was going on with Syria. So this was not on every single street corner, but definitely in many, many places, especially the more popular regions, the more tourist regions. And so I'll read just another passage from my blog. Naturally, the fact that Turkey is on the brink of war with Syria is dominating the national conversation here. Simple occurrences like the sound of a helicopter's propellers overhead or the sight of an unaccompanied package on a bus seat evoke fears of Syrian invasion and bomb threats. I'm finding myself stuck in an inescapable state of anticipation, of fear of war, of the very real possibility of evacuation. And so this, again, on top of a lot of the other internal factors that were going on, was just made for a very unique experience and unique glimpse of just the reality of being in that part of the world. And so finally, to add a little bit of light to some of this darkness, obviously, there were many things that I experienced that were difficult and that I was not expecting, that most people do not experience studying abroad. But I cannot tell you what an unbelievable and fascinating experience it was. And one of the things that I kept thinking as well is, I was thinking, okay, I'm struggling here. This is very difficult for me, being a woman, being American, having Syria going on. But I kept thinking, this is my glimpse at this. I'm here for 4 months and 4 months only. And, while this may be difficult for me, what about all these wonderful Turkish friends that I have met? And, all these people not only in Turkey but throughout the region, through regions across the world that are experiencing this and much worse on a daily basis. And that is their reality. They're the ones in this inescapable state. And so that gave me a lot of much needed perspective, which I know I will carry with me for the rest of my life, because that is not something that you can shake off or that you can forget. And so that was probably the most valuable part of my education there. And like Blythe was talking about, something that you can't learn inside the classroom. And you can't necessarily learn on Wake Forest campus, but something that you really need to be thrown into a very difficult and strange environment in order to really understand. So finally, reflecting back, this is probably going to be a little redundant, but just saying, while my 4 months as a resident of Istanbul have not been easy, typical, or familiar, they have provided me with an invaluable education. All of my experiences, the good, bad, beautiful, and ugly, have stretched me so far beyond what I had accepted as my limits, forcing me to re-examine and reevaluate myself, my country, and my world through a vastly different lens. This is the kind of knowledge, the kind of education that few are blessed with in one lifetime, much less in one semester. And this is actually a quote that I had on my blog, which is especially special to read after seeing Maya Angelou speak in the fall. But I think this is such a wonderful way to look at it. Perhaps travel cannot prevent bigotry, but by demonstrating that all people cry, laugh, eat, worry, and die, it can introduce the idea that if we try and understand each other, we may even become friends. And this is something that I really sort of encompasses, I think, my whole experience, because this is really initially what got me so fascinated and interested in the Middle East and in Islam, was meeting these different international friends and Muslim friends on Wake Forest campus as a freshman, and by looking at someone and thinking they could not be more different from me. But then by realizing, after actually talking to them and trying to understand them and their story, that we're not that different. And that is absolutely something that I also understood and found out in Turkey and since then as well. So with that, I will open the floor up to questions if anyone has anything they want to ask.